Here's what's coming up this hour. The latest from Ukraine as delegates gather to begin another round of talks over the war. President Volodymyr Zelensky insists on Ukraine's need for territorial integrity. Plus, keeping Russia accountable as the UK's Attorney General appoints a war crimes lawyer to advise Ukraine over the Russia invasion. Hello and thanks for joining us, everyone, for another hour of our coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. Let's bring you up to speed with the latest now. First off, the mayor of the Ukrainian city of Irpin says Ukrainian forces have seized full control of the town today. The town, which sits some 20 kilometers outside of Kyiv, the country's capital, has seen some of the most important fighting for the future of Kyiv. Mayor Alexander Makushin posted on social media today, "We have good news today. Irpin has been liberated. We understand there will be more attacks on our town and we will defend it courageously." What else? A Ukrainian member of parliament says Russia has forcibly relocated thousands of civilians from Mariupol, which has been under heavy Russian shelling over the last few days. Now, even though many people have managed to escape, thousands more are still trapped. Also, the government has called off the humanitarian corridors over the intelligence reports that could be foiled by Russian forces. Ukraine's defense ministry says Russian vessels are preparing missile strikes against Ukrainian targets. They also believe vessels of Russia's Black Sea Fleet are carrying out tasks in designated areas of the Black and Azov Sea operational zones. According to the defense ministry, some vessels have entered a closed area, probably in order to carry out missile strikes against facilities in Ukraine. Russian troops are focusing on keeping their positions and are trying to regroup in order to enhance their offensive capabilities. The Ukrainian government says the war in the country has cost Ukraine over $564 billion so far. That's in damages infrastructure, lost economic growth, and other factors. And Russia has announced it is preparing retaliatory visa measures that would restrict entry for citizens from unfriendly countries. That's according to Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. As well, the recent developments out of Ukraine, a plane carrying Russian delegates has arrived in the Turkish capital, Istanbul, ahead of the first face-to-face talks with Kyiv in more than 2 weeks. Ukrainian officials played down the chances of a major breakthrough of the talks due to be held in Istanbul tomorrow, following a phone call between Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and Russia's President Vladimir Putin on Sunday. But the fact that they were taking place in person at all for the first time since an acrimonious meeting between foreign ministers on March 10 was a sign of shifts behind the scene as Russia's invasion has become bogged down. Russia and Ukraine say their delegations will arrive in Turkey today, with the talks due to start tomorrow. We mentioned him earlier. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the meeting between President Vladimir Putin and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky should happen once the two sides are closer to agreeing on key issues. Speaking to Serbian media outlets earlier today, Mr. Lavrov added that any meeting between Putin and Zelensky to exchange views on conflicts right now would be counterproductive. Russia sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine on February 24. It's been more than a month now in what it called a special operation to degrade its southern neighbor's military capabilities and root out people that it calls dangerous nationalists. Ukrainian forces have mounted stiff resistance, and the West has imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia in an effort to force it to withdraw its forces. We'll stay with developments out of Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's ready to move forward with a peace deal with Russia, but insists on territorial integrity of his country after suggesting earlier he was ready for a compromise. He told Ukrainians on Sunday, and I'm quoting him here, "We have a new round of negotiations ahead because we seek peace, really, without delays. I'm informed that there is an opportunity and need for a face-to-face meeting at the territory of Turkey, which is not bad. But we'll look at the results. Our priorities in the negotiations are known. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine are beyond doubt. Effective guarantees of security for our country are mandatory." Those remarks come ahead of the meetings planned tomorrow to be held in person in Turkey, which will continue from Tuesday to Wednesday. Much earlier in the day, President Zelensky spoke to Russian journalists in a video that the Kremlin had preemptively warned Russian media to refrain from reporting. However, in that call, he adopted a different tone, saying his country is ready to discuss a neutral stance as part of peace deal with Russia and compromise over the status of the eastern Donbas region. He spoke to them in Russian, telling them security guarantees neutrality, non-nuclear status of our state. We are ready to go for it. The VOA's Anna Chernikova joins us now. Anna is in Ivano-Frankivsk. Anna, thank you for joining us on the program. Is it certain now that the peace talks will begin from tomorrow in Turkey?
Hello. Well, yes, this is the information that we all have, and we're all waiting for the talks.
And those talks are going to be, what's the mood like, as, Ukrainians expect, these talks to hold? Are they hopeful that, this time there could be some resolution at the end of the meetings on Wednesday? Or are they, looking at this as same like they've had in the past?
Definitely no one expects it to be the last negotiation or negotiation that will bring a lot of, like some final decisions. But at least we can see that at the front line, there are a lot of very serious changes, especially around Kyiv and especially in some areas in the south part of Ukraine. So there is a certain possibility, as what people expect here, that some points during the talks would be agreed on. Of course, President Zelensky mentioned that Ukraine is ready to discuss the neutral status. This might be also one of the, points which shows that probably certain negotiation, certain part of this negotiation might be successful. But again, it's very, it's very, emotional point with the neutral status, and I think it's not that easy.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask about that. President Zelensky is saying he's ready to discuss Ukraine's neutral status. What do Ukrainians think about this when you consider it's been more than a month you've been fighting this war and pushing back against those Russian forces that have invaded Ukraine, and then you consider the number of people who've already died and the hundreds of thousands who have already been displaced?
Yeah, definitely Ukrainians would never, ever accept certain neutrality which would lead to another aggression in another couple of years or 10 years or decades. So I think that what the most important now within the society and what is under very deep negotiations as well is that it might be that we would just discuss a different security status, so different security guarantees, because basically neutral status means that Ukraine would not join NATO, but again, no one is saying that Ukraine would not create any other military, will not join any other military group, like protection group or support group. So Ukraine would definitely negotiate a certain security status for sure, and this security status should not be similar to what we had with Budapest Memorandum.
Anna, when you hear your president say that, dialing back on some of the issues that he raised before, of course, emphasizing on Ukraine's sovereignty, and now dialing down on that and saying Ukraine will remain neutral, how does that make you feel when you hear your president say that, and the fact that he's willing to compromise with the Russian president?
First of all, our president, Ukrainian president is saying that this would be this would be decided by Ukrainian people at the referendum. So it's not something that he would do without asking the society. Again, in the Ukrainian society, there are discussions that neutral status doesn't mean that Ukraine would not join any other military organization except of NATO. So I think that it would be very important for Ukrainian delegation to negotiate this neutral status with, quite wide opportunities for another military organizations to join, because obviously Ukrainians would never accept, the situation that Ukraine would not get any support, any military support next time when the aggression might happen again.
Indeed. And just before I let you go, Anna, pretty disturbing news we're hearing out of Mariupol. First, I'd like you to confirm what we're hearing, that those humanitarian corridors are being called off.
Yes, unfortunately, Russian side, they didn't confirm that they would keep this corridor safe. So shellings are going on, and there is no ceasefire, neither guarantee nor even hope. So unfortunately, yes, none of the corridors were working. What we know that in some areas, local governments were still trying to, to pass certain humanitarian stuff to people. But again, we still don't know if this was a success or not.
Okay. And then it almost seems like a dark cloud hanging over Mariupol at the moment. Yesterday, the mayor advised people to leave, but then how can they leave when they cannot leave because they need security to leave, right?
Yes, exactly. But, unfortunately, I should probably specify that Mariupol is the most tragic, case in this war. And unfortunately, Mariupol and Mariupol citizens are suffering the most so far. People still try to leave because there is still an opportunity to live with private cars. But again, it's never a guarantee. It's always a risk. But people still, choose this over staying in the city, because staying in the city is just no hope at all. And today there is no information either anyone tried to leave with a private car or not. But previous days when people were leaving, they still didn't get any. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Previous days when people were trying to leave, they didn't get any guarantees either. So yes, in case of Mariupol, it's not clear if any of the negotiation will help to solve this situation.
But there is hope, though, at least they're talking, Anna. So eyes on the ground, looking forward to the outcome, at least of the first day of negotiations tomorrow. Thanks again, Anna, and do stay safe, as always.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anna Chernikova in Ukraine. Now, this made headlines over the weekend. President Joe Biden's comment on President Vladimir Putin saying that he cannot remain in power. He made this comment in Poland, Warsaw, Poland, on Saturday. Now, while several White House officials have tried to explain away what the president meant, the president himself responded to questions about whether he was calling for regime change in Russia. And this was him just outside of the church. He simply replied, no. As if that was not enough, the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Makarova, rallied with dozens of demonstrators in support of Ukraine at the Lincoln Memorial on Sunday, where she echoed President Joe Biden's comments in Poland when he called Russian President Vladimir Putin a butcher. President Biden has also called him a war criminal. And then, the controversial comment about President Putin not being long in power.
Putin and his generals I don't even know whether we still call them soldiers, because armed forces do not fight like this, demonstrate how little they value human lives. And the thin red line between the right and wrong has been drawn in blood of Ukrainian children and mothers, teachers and students, doctors and reporters, including brave American reporters who on the first line today, together with Ukrainian reporters, showing the truth to the world. But together we will win this war. And because should we lose this war, should tyranny, oligarchy, and brutality prevail, the world will be overcome by continued aggression and insecurity for decades to come. It's of course about Ukraine for us, but it's about much more than Ukraine. This is why Ukraine should not, actually must not, be alone in this fight. This is why we have to act together, and we have to act faster and stronger. It took the world too long to comprehend that Putin was a criminal and that Putin was a murderer. This war has shaken off the last facade of the decency and has shown the grim reality of what Russian Federation is today, and has shown that Putin is war criminal, Putin is mass murderer, and Putin is a butcher.
Interesting words from the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Makarova, at the Lincoln Memorial on Sunday. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Burr, joins us now to break this down. Maria, I know that Americans, feel some sympathy for Ukrainians, but what is that born out of? I mean, you've seen people all over the country waving Ukrainian flags, people calling for more action, more support for Ukraine. What is driving that for Americans?
The president has been very strategic in this whole process. He came out, I think, before many Americans even knew what was actually happening between Russia and Ukraine. You also must remember the relationship between the U.S. and Russia and some of the turmoil that has gone on over the last few months with the new administration here in the U.S. And so Russia has been on the eyes of the U.S. Prior to the Biden administration, but a much different relationship with the Trump administration. And so that is some of where you're seeing some of this relationship, or seeming to be an extensive interest on behalf of the U.S. and the American people as it relates to humanitarian efforts with Ukraine. So we're really standing, I think, at this time as trying to, I think, reclaim our place in the world and the global leadership. And also continuing to stand and reacting and kind of re-energizing some of what the U.S. has stood for, being that kind of humanitarian symbol for the world.
Maria, does the U.S. Consider what its relations with Russia might be like, when this war is over?
I think that the United States has considered its relationship with Russia, not just in the last 3 to 4 years. I mean, this has been, I think, brewing some of the tension for 5 to 7 years. If we really look at the U.S.-Russia relationship. So I think that they think about that. I think the real question is, what is going to be different moving forward, and what are some of the issues the U.S. has expressed with Russia, even prior to the Ukraine-Russia war. I think, are those going to be addressed? And are some of the challenges that the U.S. has brought forth with the oligarchy, are those going to be brought forth? So that's going to really determine the future of the U.S.-Russia relationship.
Now, back to what President Biden said in Poland on Saturday, which has many media companies, riled and racing to interpret what the president meant by what he said. He's called President Putin a war criminal. He's called him a butcher. Now he says, that he cannot remain in power. Why is that being misconstrued as for him calling for regime change?
You know, I think that when President Biden went off script, I think many people knew that. I think that he, as we know, he's a long-term foreign relations. That is his area of expertise. That's what he spent time in Congress doing. That's what he's known for. And I think that's what many Americans were hopeful that he would do entering into the White House. So I think, you know, the comments there are, as you said, being misconstrued by some might say that, and that he was calling for regime change. But I think what he was focusing in on is what he knows of Russia and some of his long-standing work in the area of foreign relations. So I think the White House is really working to ensure that he shows alliance and that the U.S. shows alliance with NATO as what was the focal point of his trip to Europe and, as you mentioned, his speech in Poland.
Maria, stay with us. Need to talk to you some more after the break, will you? Coming up after the break, more on the U.S.-Russia relations and what President Biden thinks of this meeting holding tomorrow. Plus, the Pentagon saying it will help gather evidence of Russian war crimes in Ukraine. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, still standing by for us. Maria, more on President Joe Biden. And let's look at his ratings back home. Now, according to certain polls, the president's ratings are falling in the United States. What can that be attributed to?
You know, many Americans are still struggling financially. What you're seeing is a domestic issue. We know that COVID-19 took a major toll on the American people. And I think that America is going back to what they're considering a new normal, or trying to even do things the way they were done prior to COVID. Things are opening back up again, but many Americans are still feeling unemployment issues. They're still feeling, inflation. And so the economy, I think, is really what's putting a major impact on President Biden. And as we know, the Ukraine war has been of his priorities over the last month. We also know that the infrastructure bill was a huge priority for him. But the question now is, where are the jobs? I think many Americans are asking. And not only where are the jobs, but where is a different style of life? And being able to afford the things that are necessary, I think, to really uplift the middle class.
So the U.S. is heavily invested now in Ukraine. Billions of dollars have already gone into military assistance in Ukraine. But explain to us, where the Republicans and the Democrats stand on this war.
Well, the Democrats and Republicans, I think, one area that they both agree that this war is uncalled for. I think that they both are not in agreement with the war. So this is one area that the U.S. is united on. The real question is, how are we addressing it moving forward? Republicans are really looking at the U.S. standing as a strong country. I think that's where their focus is. Democrats are focused again on the humanitarian efforts and some of the democratic issues that exist and wanting to hold true to democracy for Ukraine. So that's where you're going to see some difference. But as far as the spending, the president will be presenting his 2023 spending plan, and $31 billion, in addition to what's already been spent, is being requested for Ukraine, and to provide additional military assistance with defense armory and things like that. So I think when we see where this bill goes and we see how Congress responds to it, both Republicans and Democrats will give us further insight into really what the future will be for how Republicans will continue to support, and if they will support, President Biden and his efforts moving forward.
Thanks a lot, Maria, and thanks for keeping us updated, on the president's thoughts, especially on Ukraine, as well as, where America stands on this. Thanks again. Now the news now, the UK's Attorney General has appointed a war crimes lawyer to advise Ukraine over the Russian invasion. Suella Braverman said Sir Howard Morrison would become an independent advisor to Ukraine's chief prosecutor, Irina Venediktova. Sir Howard served as a judge on the International Criminal Court in The Hague for more than 12 years. It comes as Russian forces continue to be accused of violating international law by targeting civilians. Much earlier this month, President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of committing war crimes started launched airstrikes in Kharkiv. They hit an opera house, a concert hall, and government offices. So just to bring you up to speed, just last week, the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby did say that there is clear evidence the Russian military is conducting war crimes in its invasion of Ukraine. According to him, Russia is the aggressor. And quote, I think we have seen here at the Pentagon, we're certainly seeing clear evidence that the Russian military is conducting war crimes. We think it's important for the investigative process to continue. We're going to contribute to that. But obviously, relations with Russia are at a premium, are not at a premium, nor should they be given the unprovoked and illegal aggression that Russia has put on the people of Ukraine. Kirby's comments were made after the U.S. condemned Russia for committing war crimes amid its war in Ukraine. And those condemnations mark a shift in tone for U.S. officials, as images and reports show, among other things, Russian attacks on civilians. United Nations Human Rights Office on Tuesday reported over 2,500 civilian casualties since the invasion against Ukraine started on February 24th. Bear in mind, these figures are from last week. Still waiting for the ones from this week. 1,557 were injured, but the actual figures may be higher. President Biden has called President Putin a war criminal. He's also called him a butcher. A Pentagon spokesperson says U.S. and other nations are documenting potential evidence to help investigators at the international level determine if Russia has committed war crimes.
We certainly see clear evidence that Russian forces are committing war crimes, and we are helping with the collecting of evidence of that. But there's investigative processes that are going to go on, and we're going to let that happen. We're going to contribute to that investigative process. As for what would come out of that, that's not a decision that the Pentagon leadership would make. I'm not going to talk about specific systems that are in Ukraine, and I think you guys can understand why we wouldn't do that. The operational security matters to the Ukrainians right now. They're fighting for their country, and the Pentagon is not going to be detailing publicly the tools with which they are doing that. So I'm not going to talk about specific systems one way or the other.
Joining me now is legal practitioner Oba Nsube. He's in London. Oba, thank you for joining me on the program.
My pleasure. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. And you?
Yes, fine, thank you.
So what do you make of this? You know, the UK's Attorney General appointing a war crimes lawyer to advise the Ukrainian government, especially on war crimes committed by Russian forces in Ukraine.
Well, I think what we've seen over the past month or so is a Herculean effort by the UK government to support Ukraine by really any means, save for putting boots on the ground or save for setting up a no-fly zone. But other than that, we've seen the UK really pull out all the stops to support Ukraine. And I think this latest development, where the UK government, essentially the Attorney General, has appointed, in quotes, an independent advisor to the chief prosecutor in Ukraine, is just part of the UK really bending over backwards to support Ukraine.
Do you think it's too much effort, you know, having made military pledges and then, you know, trying to drum up all the support they can within the EU, within NATO, and other countries, even providing, you know, visas for refugees coming from Ukraine into the UK?
Well, I think on one level, listen, this is a humanitarian crisis. So on one level, you can understand everybody looking to help because people are being killed. And these are innocent people. They have no part to play they're not neo-Nazis. They're ordinary human beings going about their daily life and they're being bombed. So on one level, you can understand it. But on the other hand, clearly, there seems to be a disparity between the way in which the UK or other countries react to crises abroad. So say, for example, this was Syria or Syrian refugees. I'm not entirely sure you'd see the same efforts. You certainly wouldn't see the UK government looking to appoint an independent advisor to deal with war crimes. So what I would prefer to see is balance. We don't see that at the moment. We see really every effort being made. I mean, we have over here in the UK, we have UK households literally offering their homes to Ukrainian refugees and opening the doors to them. But often, where you see people fleeing crimes or conflict areas, whether it's in Syria, whether it's Cameroon, whether it's Eritrea, you don't see the same reaction.
And that's the hypocrisy that some analysts have been talking about, the fervency with which, the West seems to be carrying all of this. You think that may be driven by a fear, that Russia could do the same to neighboring countries, and that, what Russia is doing to Ukraine could extend even to other NATO countries, perhaps? No one really wants this war at the end of the day.
There's no doubt about it, because at the end of the day, I mean, let's be honest, countries act in their own interests, really. They act in their national interests. And so what UK is doing is acting in its national interest. It's seeing a war in Europe for the first time in 50 years on its doorstep. So, Ukraine is a stone throw away from Poland. Poland is 3-4 hours from the UK. So it is seeing real strife on its doorstep, and that it has a potential to spread and cause real instability to the UK and to other Western countries. So, in its national interest, it is in the UK's interest to support Ukraine. There is a fear there. There's definitely Russian aggression. We can see that. There's no doubt about that. So, the UK is reacting to that aggression, which is mixed, I think, both with a need to protect what it sees as Western values and Western democracies, and also out of fear of a resurgent Russia looking to establish its influence over the Baltic countries. Because Russia has seen, obviously, a loss of influence over Baltic countries, whether it's Yugoslavia, whether it's Lithuania, Poland. All of these countries used to be strongly linked with Russia, but no longer so.
Yeah, indeed. Do you think then it is fair to call him a war criminal?
Well, I think, if you don't mind me saying, that's for others to judge. Let me define what a war crime is. A war crime is where people, citizens, are deliberately targeted by aggression of this kind, deliberately targeted, or the infrastructure that essentially supports them is targeted. So that whether that is schools, whether that is apartments, whether that is utilities, whether that is hospitals, all of those, if you deliberately target them, you may find yourself being accused of war crimes. But what you'll find is that it is quite often very difficult to prosecute those at the top. It is much easier to prosecute those soldiers, for example, who may be accused of war crimes. So I understand evidence is being gathered at the moment by the ICC and various other bodies. It's for them to gather evidence. It's for them to, if they think that they can, to prove allegations. But obviously for a lawyer like myself, it would be wrong for me to come out and accuse anybody of war crimes, because all of these things are the subject of evidence and in due course the subject of adjudication.
So I think that takes me back again to my first question, which is, why the UK is doing this, providing a war crimes lawyer to advise the Ukrainian government. What do you think could come out of that?
It's unusual. It's unusual. But what could come out of that? I mean, the lawyer that's been appointed is Sir Howard Morrison. Sir Howard Morrison was a judge of the ICC, the International Criminal Court. He was a judge for 12 years. He has a lot of experience in the prosecution of war crimes. Indeed, you'll remember the Bosnian conflict. People were successfully prosecuted from there. And that was Sir Howard Morrison was involved in some of those cases as a judge. So he has a lot of experience. So no doubt he will be advising the chief prosecutor of Ukraine as to the sort of evidence that would be required to bring a case of war crimes. But you have to remember that Russia pulled out of the ICC a number of years ago, so it isn't subject to the ICC jurisdiction. So if you wanted to prosecute anybody, the judges, first of all, would have to issue a warrant from the ICC court, and then that warrant would have to be executed. There'd be a serious problem executing that warrant. because I can't imagine President Putin executing any warrants either against himself or indeed against any of the soldiers that he's in command of. So enforcement is a problem, but of course he has the experience, he has the skills, he has the qualifications to give good advice, I'm sure, which is probably what is happening. But it must be the fact that the UK government has gone so far as to appoint a lawyer, essentially, to advise Ukraine is just an example of how seriously the UK is taking this in its national interest. That is what it boils down to.
Yeah, the UK and the US as well, taking this really seriously. Oba, thank you so much for speaking with me. I know you've had a busy day today, but appreciate your analysis on the issue.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, the United States considers his Russian United States President Joe Biden considers his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin a war criminal, a butcher, says he should not be in power for long. But even the United States and the West have been called out for their own interventions in wars across the globe where innocent civilians have been killed without anyone fighting for their justice. Much earlier, I spoke to Professor of African Politics, African Development and International Relations at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, Professor Christopher Isike. He was in Indiana in the US. He believes this is a reflection of what he calls racism that exists in international politics and in international relations. Some have talked about, the morality of this war and the morality in the war, how countries in the West are condemning Russia for doing what they themselves have done in Libya, in Syria, in the Middle East, Iraq, and so on. And yet they're trying to make themselves look like the good guys here in this instance. What do you think?
Well, yes, that's correct, that the West has behaved in this sort of way, disrespecting international law, international norms. You mentioned Iraq, you mentioned Syria. These are examples, and many critics of the West have used this whataboutism, as excuse for why Russia should, be, allowed to do what it is doing. But I think that it should go beyond that, because if this conflict, I've said elsewhere, provides a silver lining for the world and for Africa especially to push for a redefinition of the international system, one that will be more inclusive of geographies like Africa, and a world that will be more equitable, and a push for a reform of the United Nations Security Council, where countries would not just, it won't be for countries that are friends with one another, or countries that are there because of the power that they have. It should also recognize the power of demographics, so that countries like Nigeria, for example, should have very good reason why they should be part of that decision-making body, irrespective of what happens within Nigeria itself as a country. We've seen democracy also recede in the United States, for example. It has not stopped the United States from pushing for democracy, advancing democracy all over the world. So the fact that we have developmental problems does not mean that we cannot have a seat on the table on account of our population in the world alone. And of course, our importance, our strategic importance extends beyond that. But we need to see this conflict as an opportunity to push for a more fair international system that is actually inclusive, that is truly international, in as the name implies. And a starting point would be, getting, different regions of the world a seat on the table on account of representativity, not just of, military power or economic power. And there are countries in the United Nations Security Council that are not even superpowers in any form, but they are in the United Nations Security Council. So those are some of the inequities in the global system that allow for this kind of behavior, by Russia, because it's been done before by the West. The West has tolerated it, and when Russia does it, it's legitimate when people say, but if the United States had done it, Russia should be able to do it, even though the pushback is that where the United States is so superpower, Russia is not. So these are, contending views. But my own position is simply that we have an international system that is not fair, that is racist, that is inequitable, and we must, as an African continent, come together and find ways to push for a redefinition of that war, either from the ashes of this war or from the ashes of a global world war, depending on what happens going forward.
Now, when you're talking about, that international body, I suppose you're talking about the UN, and reforms in the UN have been spoken about, with each General Assembly. The UN has a Security Council. There's a secluded group, of course, with Russia as a member. Can the UN make any effective impact on this war, any effective resolution concerning the war in Ukraine with Russia being part of the Security Council?
No, it can't, and that's why it couldn't deter Russia in the first place. It couldn't even get a vote to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the United Nations Security Council. It could only do that in the UN General Assembly, and this is what I'm talking about: an international system that allows for a few countries, for whatever reasons, to sit around the table and decide the fate of others, billions of people that are not represented. And this is based on the logic of being and non-being, the racist being, categorization of the world into two zones of Europeans as beings who enjoy special privileges and non-Europeans, including Africans, as non-beings, non-human beings, who are an afterthought depending on the whims and caprices of the so-called beings. Until we have an international system where a human being, irrespective of your color or ethnicity, is a human being, and people are not grouped into regions based on their race, but based on the fact that every human being is equal and every human being deserves the enjoyment of rights and privileges that the world has to offer. That should be the logic, the ontological basis of an international system.
Of course, you can watch the full interview with Professor Christopher Isike on Diplomatic Channel. It is later today at 8:30 p.m. on Sky 518 and at 11:30 p.m. on DSTV. Now, still ahead. A Metro concert brings a brief respite from darkness of war to residents of Kharkiv. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Spanish government says it will approve on Tuesday a package of around 16 billion euros in direct aid and sub-loans to help companies and households cope with high energy prices. That's according to Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. Earlier today, he told reporters at an event the war response shock plan will protect industries and citizens. The government plan is an attempt to assuage social discontent prompted by the high energy costs exacerbated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Truck drivers have been on strike for 2 weeks over fuel prices, causing sporadic goods shortages all over the country. Around 6 billion euros will be dispersed as direct aid and tax cuts, while the remaining 10 billion euros are subsidized loans. Both are part of wider measures that all will also include limits on house rent increases and caps on energy prices. Prime Minister Sanchez says he would update the system of state financial support for renewable energy generation, which entails a reduction in electricity costs of up to 55% by 2022, worth around 1.8 billion euros. Now, to further soothe discontent, the government will also extend a 20-cent discount on each litre of fuel offered to truckers and other companies to all citizens. The government will pay for the first 15 cents and petrol companies a minimum of 5 cents. Wealthy Russians are pouring money into real estate in Turkey and the United Arab Emirates, seeking a financial haven in the wake of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine and Western sanctions, according to many property companies. In Dubai, Tiago Caldas, who's CEO of the modern living property firm, has hired 3 Russian-speaking agents to meet Russian interests, which he says leapt tenfold. Sanctions imposed since February 24 include Russia's exclusion from the SWIFT banking system and the targeting of individuals such as oligarchs deemed to be close to President Vladimir Putin. While Turkey and the UAE have criticized the Russian offensive, Ankara opposes non-UN sanctions on Russia, and both countries have relatively good ties with Moscow and still operate direct flights, potentially offering routes out for Russia and their cash.
Expo started coming to an end, and everybody was expecting the market to slow down as well. And then the Russian crisis started. So that was a new boost in the market. Not only the Russians, but it helped, I wouldn't say help, but was an incentive for Europeans also keep coming to Dubai. Right? So Russians are already used to Dubai. They just kept coming more. Yeah, obviously the number of Russians who get interested in the market here now is much more than I would say 2 months ago or 3 months ago. Right in the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, we launched a campaign in the region, and the number of people that contacted us, it was, I would say, at least 10 times higher than it usually would be for such type of campaign. If you buy 750,000 dirhams worth of real estate, you get automatically the right to apply for a residence visa, and that would be for 3 years, renewable as long as you keep the property. We have other types of visas that are going to increase depending on the amount that you invest. If you invest 5 million dirhams, you would be able to apply for a 5 years visa, renewable as well. So that's definitely a big incentive. As I said, not just Russians, but Europeans and any other nationality.
Meanwhile, energy ministers from the group of 7 industrialized nations have rejected demands by President Vladimir Putin that unfriendly countries pay for Russian gas with rubles. Germany's energy minister, Robert Habeck, explained this after talks with his counterparts earlier today. He says all G7 ministers have agreed that this is a unilateral and clear breach of existing contracts. Habeck himself, who is Germany's economy and climate protection minister, told reporters during a virtual conference with G7 energy ministers. Those ministers underlined once again that the concluded contracts are valid and the companies should and must respect them. Payment in rubles is unacceptable, he says. We call on the companies concerned not to comply with Putin's demands. He goes on to say Putin's attempt to divide us is obvious, but as you can see from the great unity and determination, we will not be divided. And the United States and NATO should be blamed for continuing to supply arms to Ukraine, as the move is going to further fuel the ongoing conflict. So says Adolfo Pastran, member of the Nicaraguan National Assembly. He was speaking in an exclusive interview on a China state television. The politician approved China's approach to solving the crisis through dialogue and negotiations. He says China's advocacy of resolving the Ukraine crisis through dialogue is correct. This bears on maintaining world peace and also echoes people's aspirations at this moment. He attributed the current crisis in Ukraine to NATO's ever-continuing eastward expansion and its attempt to contain Russia. Given the current situation, the United States and NATO are doing nothing but adding fuel to the flame by continuing to supply weapons to Ukraine. That's what he says. He further says we must learn and ensure that all nations coexist peacefully. While China makes continuous efforts on maintaining peace, the U.S., on the other hand, has been stirring up wars. The U.S. and NATO members are offering military assistance, which further inflames the conflicts. As we end the program with the Russia-Ukraine war underway, since the past 1 month, several cities, including Kharkiv, continue to be attacked by Vladimir Putin's forces. But the metro station in Kharkiv is now turned into a bomb shelter for civilians. Well, there's hope, though. Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs tweeted some pictures earlier of civilians spending their lives in the metro station, which has now turned into a bomb shelter. Children decorating the walls of the metro station with paintings, some even trying to make some semblance of normal life, one of which is this mini concert holding at one of those bomb shelters in Kharkiv. Kharkiv itself has been at the crosshairs of Russian forces since the invasion began on February 24. Ukraine's nuclear watchdog says nuclear facilities in Kharkiv were shelled by Russia, and the relentless fighting is making it impossible to assess the damage. But listen to the mini concert here at this train station. Many have hope. People trying to find some semblance of normalcy in their daily lives in Ukraine. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Have a great evening.